Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today, and that was really terrific, Carrie. I certainly learned quite a bit. The whole process, before, during and after my diagnosis with ovarian cancer, has been a bit of an emotional roller coaster in many ways. I first took ill in 2014. At that time, I went regularly to a GP complaining of various symptoms. Eventually, 5 months later, I went to the emergency section of a hospital where I was told I had ovarian cancer. It was stage 3. So the impact on myself and my family was enormous. So just a quick background to my diagnosis, or lack thereof. For 6 months before, I had attended a local GP complaining of not feeling well. I was displaying all the signs of ovarian cancer: bloating, I looked 9 months pregnant, tiredness, and I was in great pain and needed to urinate frequently. After 4 months, I had insisted on various tests, but none showed my cancer, even though the growth was enormous. I eventually went to a hospital emergency department because of the pain level. Here I was casually told I had ovarian cancer. As I knew very little about ovarian cancer, the full impact of this diagnosis really did not register till well into my treatment. Looking back, that was probably good, as maybe I would not have been quite so optimistic and buoyant. I have a very supportive husband and 2 wonderful grown daughters who swung into action and found the names of various surgeons whom we interviewed and discussed my case with. We decided on a surgeon, and a week after my diagnosis, I was transferred to another hospital for my surgery and recovery. However, I and my family and friends were very upset by the lack of diagnosis from the GP. It was a source of great frustration, anger and disbelief for us all. I'm still annoyed that the cancer took 6 months to be diagnosed. My oncologist had explained that the best scenario was to have chemotherapy to shrink the tumours and then an operation. But as my intestines were blocked, this was not an option because the diagnosis had taken so long. I'd had operations before, but this was massive compared to previous ones. I was in hospital for a month. My oncologist joked the other day that I thought I'd never leave. I realise now I was really very ill and run down when I went to hospital, so that did not help my recovery. Both surgeons and their teams visited twice a day. This was quite comforting, as I had regular opportunities to ask questions and check on my progress. My chemo started a few weeks after I left hospital. After 3 months, the remaining tumours had shrunk and I had an operation. This time I was only in hospital for 10 days or so, then 3 more months of chemo, and that finished at the end of May 2015. During my hospital and chemo, I found it very hard to concentrate and remember things, so we had a communication book where I and the family would write questions to ask the surgeons, the dietitians, social workers, nurses, and others involved in my treatment. All of these people were enormously supportive to me and my family while in hospital. I was still in touch with them during my chemotherapy, and their advice continued to be helpful and encouraging. I still have a little notebook that I jot things down in because I'm just hopeless. The ovarian cancer resilience kit had arrived quickly when I was in hospital and was very useful for us all to refer to for information. My family relied on that information and other pamphlets too that were given to us. My family and friends were all in shock at this stage, as I was normally a very healthy, very active person. I was still working full-time as the director of a heritage museum in the city. I also chaired a number of organisations. I was very involved in the museum and heritage sector, as well as my local community. So I had to organise quite a few logistical things, but luckily there were wonderful people to take over. During my treatment, I was asked to participate in a number of trials while I was at the hospital and afterwards. I was really happy to do so, as I reasoned that there was so much that was unknown about ovarian cancer that if I could help in any way, I would. Some were with genetic and lifestyle trials, and even my chemo. My chemo trial meant that I had chemo administered on a weekly basis. I have to say I was very worried about chemo and spoke to a couple of friends who had had cancer, and they were wonderfully reassuring. Having weekly chemo meant that I had lower doses than someone who had treatment every 3 weeks. So luckily for me, I really felt nauseous. But weekly hospital visits were tiring. So I decided to organise a roster of friends and family to collect me after my treatment. This gave my husband time to himself too. After the treatments, we had coffee and cake. So it meant that I did something vaguely normal. Often I was quite exhausted, but the hour talking with friends was a wonderful distraction. Indeed, when I was home and too sick to do much, friends popped into the house on almost a daily basis, and again this distracted me and passed the time. My husband could go off and do his own things too. My dear friend, or one dear friend I should say, pushed me down the street in a wheelchair a few times and organised to take me through an exhibition at the National Gallery of Victoria in a wheelchair. It was wonderful. As if I'd walked and stood, I would have been totally exhausted. I started walking daily and exercising as soon as I got out of hospital. I go to Pilates weekly now, and I like to swim in summer, and I try to eat healthy foods. The chemo drastically affected my memory and ability to concentrate. It was months before I could read a book or was interested in newspapers. I was quite concerned about this. Luckily, I watched a webinar on Chemo Brain, and it gave you tips such as just do one thing at a time, finish one activity, then start something else. This worked for me. At a support group meeting, others told me that they had been the same, so that was reassuring. I would say to friends, I forget things. And I'm weary and I'm tired. They would reply, oh, that's normal at our age. Sometimes I'd say nothing, and sometimes I would say, yes, it is normal, but multiply it by 10, and that's how I feel. When people ask me how I was, rather than giving my normal polite, oh, I'm fine, I would say actually how I was. My treatment's going well, but I'm exhausted, or I still have a shunt, or my veins have collapsed, or some such. It wasn't to get sympathy, I just did it. I ended up with menopausal symptoms too, both hot and cold flushes, which was very debilitating. I thought going through it once was bad enough. This was a surprise to me, but then I discovered at support sessions it was a reasonably common result of treatment. I still frequently feel hot. My sleep is not good either. I'd often have to take a nap. Indeed, finding the energy and inclination to participate in my committees has been challenging. I resigned as chair for one, as I found the strain and responsibility too draining. During my treatment, I consulted the hospital psychologist a few times and have attended talks and webinars on dealing with ovarian cancer. I found this very helpful. It normalised the number of things that I was feeling. I certainly understand now what is meant by survivor guilt too. I do worry about survival. I worry just before my 4-monthly oncology visit. Though I feel so well and everyone says I look better than I have for years. I've had to resign my position as director at the museum and retire. I miss work and colleagues. It was a fantastic job at the museum. I did go back to work briefly after I finished chemo, but now realise that was not a good idea, as I was still too weak and so many things had changed in the previous 10 months. So I'm now having to adjust to retirement. Soon after I finished treatment was my birthday, and I've been given a Queen's Birthday Award. My daughter said, Mum, please have a party. So we had a big Diane has survived, plus birthday, plus award celebration. It was a lovely, happy occasion. It was very, very special to be amongst the friends and family who come from far and wide. It was beautiful to be able to say thank you to them for their love and support. They were heartened to see me looking well and said so, and this in turn gave me a terrific boost. I did read a number of books on ovarian cancer, but I found them quite depressing and sometimes I didn't even finish them. In the midst of all of this mayhem, my daughter was pregnant and very, very ill. I got out of hospital and she went into hospital before the birth. So there I was visiting her in hospital. It broke my heart that instead of me helping her, both before and after her birth, she was helping me. I planned to take leave and be there for her. My first grandchild has turned out to be a most wonderful distraction, though it was nearly a year before I could be of real help with him. Recently, one of my daughters told me that during my stay in hospital, she had found her sister and said she could not cope with all that was happening in her life at present. She thought she'd have a nervous breakdown. Even the dog was dying. Her sister replied, "Don't worry, I feel exactly the same." My husband was exhausted mentally and physically too. I tried to be bright in hospital, but it was pretty obvious how sick I was. It took the family a long time before they felt safe to leave me alone and realised that I was recovering well. Having intense treatments over a considerable amount of time is exhausting physically, but also mentally, as you have to come to terms with the changes in your body and life. I now have white hair. I really have had the bus run over me. Regaining my strength and mental illness has required an enormous effort. My family and friends have been an amazing support in my recovery. I hear about people having a recurrence of the cancer, and I wonder if I would have the energy to go through it all. Then I remember how encouraging people were and the wonderful kindness and consideration they gave me, and this encourages me to think positively. A year after my chemo finished last May, I went with a friend on a 2-month tour to Turkey, Greece, UK and Germany. It was an amazing experience that made me feel normal again. I had the stamina to keep up with the daily activities, which gave me back lots of confidence. Obviously, it's only 15 months since I was told the tumours had reacted positively to treatment and gone. I see my surgeon oncologist regularly, but it is always good when I see people who have not seen me for a while and they say how well I look. Time will tell, as they say, but we're all thinking positively, and I feel my recovery is all a bit miraculous, and I'm very blessed. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you. Really brought to life some of those issues that Carrie was talking about in her slides and the ways in which we can cope and after cancer. We haven't had any questions, but you still have time to pop them in the box there. But I was interested in something you said about survivor guilt, Diane, and I'm wondering, Carrie, if you have some words on survivor guilt as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. And I think you can hear me but not see me again, but that's okay. Gosh, there's so many feelings, I think, after an experience of cancer. I think survivor guilt can come from the fact that you meet other people who are going through the experience, and if you're doing well, you wonder because you meet other people who maybe aren't doing so well, or you're very well supported and you know that other people aren't as well supported as you. I just think we take on such enormous burdens, and I have to say I think women tend to do this, really, really well. We question, whether we should be the ones that are looked after sometimes when we're used to being the carers, or whether it's okay for us to be doing well when we know other people aren't. So I'm not sure whether that's what Diane was talking about, but I do think that it's the residual impact of the trauma that you've been through. As I said before, I don't think you can underestimate all the feelings that brings up for you, and they can be new feelings, and it needs to, I guess, be really sat down and be able to talk that through so that you can have someone really reflect back to you about the fact that, you know, you deserve to be able to go through this experience and be the one that's cared for at the moment.
And the question is, what advice would you give to someone who's newly diagnosed?
Oh, golly. Certainly draw on all the support that there is out there. The webinars, the support groups, speak to a social worker, speak to a psychologist if you think that will help you. And as Carrie has said, certainly speak to your doctors. I have to say I found it just wonderful to be meeting regularly with friends. They would pick me up in their cars and take me out when I was well enough for that. And it just made my life seem a bit more normal. And even if I wasn't able to walk far or something, I felt as though I got out and been normal. So I really encourage that interaction with family and friends, maybe outside the house if you can, but I found their encouragement incredibly supportive and gave me a wonderful boost when I do it.
Mm-hmm. Can I make a point about that as well? Mm-hmm. I think you shouldn't underestimate the shock and that lasts for a period of time.
And shock is there to help us get through a nightmare that we're just feeling like is so enormous. And so being gentle with yourself and remembering that it usually doesn't get ever as bad as it is right at that beginning when you are still trying to work out what the hell has just happened. And I can't believe this has happened and this is all so scary. Understand that those things will fall into place generally for most women, even though you may not think if this has just happened to you that you could ever get to a point where you can see Diane talking about an experience where she has been enriched as well as been through lots of trauma. And you might be sitting thinking, I don't know even how you could get to that point where you can even talk about this in such a way. But know that it's normal to be in shock and really feeling very bewildered at that early stage.
Yes, I totally agree.
So, Carrie, on that newly diagnosed, Diane mentioned a real sense of
Frustration because of her misdiagnosis, and there was, real anger there. So, I guess Carrie would like to speak to it, or Diane would like to speak to it more.
I'll say a few things there, Diane. I want to respond. When I heard Diane say that too, it made me just feel so sad about the fact that I hear this experience often, not with everyone. And I think also that question that we had, at the beginning about, how do I get heard? And I think, sometimes it really feels like I'm not being heard and I'm telling you there is something wrong. And the fear that comes from that, I don't know what is wrong, but I know something is really wrong. It feels like such an unnecessary start to, this journey. And yet some of it is about trying to work out what a diagnosis is. But I think that experience of, if you're someone who is used to being able to manage life very well and be in control and be someone who is competent in your work and all of those sorts of things, and you're used to being able to get things sorted, and then you're not being heard in the medical profession, and which is such it's a whole new world to try and negotiate. We know. I guess I would just say that frustration is very real, and I think that experience of having been in that bewildered state and not being heard is something that's hard to get over, and it does change you, I think. But I think it's a reminder to all of us to just keep plugging at it. And if you really do feel like there's something going on and you're being told no, it's not, keep asking, keep asking, keep asking. I think that would be what I would say. But I think sometimes the experience of cancer starts before a diagnosis, and I think we need to acknowledge that, and it's about that journey of trying to work out what is going on.
I think that's where the work of ovarian cancer and these sorts of webinars is absolutely vital, because I was stunned to hear that a doctor in the course of their training could have as little as half an hour on ovarian cancer. And when you consider thousands of diseases, that's fair enough, I suppose, but it's just all that consciousness raising. And I've told my friends, we'll be sure to have an internal scan, an external one won't work. And I had terrible skin problems, which now they think is a very, very rare indication of the cancer. And that specialist now says, I tell everyone to have an internal examination, and do things like that. So it is all about consciousness raising and being informed, and just, as you said, insisting on an extra test or two.
Thank you both. We've just had one more last minute question, and that is, and perhaps this is for Carrie, what advice would you give for those women who don't have a lot of support from family or friends?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that when I was listening to Diane's experience, because that is the experience, of course, I would want for everyone. But I know that it's not there for everyone. And I do think it's a very common experience to, as I think I said before, to have, friends that you thought would be there who just for whatever reason they're not able to be, or that you don't have a supportive partner or family around you. And I think that's where looking at support groups is important. Really deciding that you require support around you, you require connection with people around you, even if it's not to do with cancer. See that as part of your treatment, if you like, to work out ways, even if it's about joining groups or going to the social worker at your hospital and saying, I'm feeling isolated. I'm feeling like I am actually managing, meals and all of those things, and I'm struggling because I don't have an army of people that are bringing meals around. Speak up, because we know that connection is so important. If it's for whatever reason you don't have that friendship group around you, there are still supports around you. And, you may not be someone who ever would have thought of joining a support group. And, there are online support groups, there are face-to-face support groups. Most people that I hear find it is so incredibly important and so great to meet with other women who are living the same experience that you are. So I think it can be very hard when you're feeling isolation on top of all of this. And again, I guess I would go back to what we've both been saying, and that is about, find your voice and, demand that you have those things around you, even if it's, not as easy as having a ready-made group of support around you.
I agree totally.
Thank you so much. So that brings us to the end of this webinar. I'd like to thank Dr. Carrie Lechborg and Diane Gardiner for being our guest presenters. We really value and appreciate the information and time that you've given us today. This webinar recording will be available to view on the OCA website in the next week. And if you're interested in continuing the conversation, we've recently launched our online forum. I'd really encourage you to head to our website to view the forum and join the community. Thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Feedback on your experience is really important to us, so please stay logged in to take our online survey, which you'll be redirected to now. Thank you again.